So groomer gangs are back in the news, mostly because Elon Musk was drawing attention to it. Why do we live in a world where a random billionaire cares more about people than politicians do their own citizens? A similar thing happened to us in Ireland, where Elon Musk said he would fund Irish legal challenges to hate speech legislation. Again, I'm really glad he's taking these stances, but I'm not sure why it has to be Elon instead of my own politicians who care about my rights. So since it's once again topical, Lonerbox is once again sharing his thoughts on the subject. About half a year ago, before this blew up again, I had accused Lonerbox of being a grooming gang defender, rather facetiously, I'll admit, because he, like many in the media and law enforcement, are downplaying what happened. I think the simple explanation for this is that he's seeing a bunch of uncouth right-wingers speaking out against grooming gangs, and his instinct is to go in the opposite direction. Lonerbox had actually watched my video off stream, and I wanted to have a debate with him about it. I was saving some of my arguments for that debate, but since he's kind of taken a step back from streaming after the whole Destiny leak thing, I figured the opportunity might never come, so I might as well make this video. I'll be using as a backdrop for a lot of my arguments the debate Lonerbox had about a month ago with Counterpoints and Short Fat Otaku. The lad's done very well, but I think they weren't prepared for all the things that Lonerbox was going to bring up.
This is the one subset of child sexual abuse where every perpetrator is guaranteed a newspaper headline, despite the fact that there are about 6,000 plus people who get convicted of grooming and abusing children sexually every year. The only time they're ever guaranteed a newspaper headline is if they're Muslim and in a gang. There's some truth to the fact that some of it was because people did not know how to approach ethnic issues in terms of like going after people who were Muslim. It's a real shame that these issues and all the hard work of care workers and researchers and experts has to get basically shafted by a bunch of cowardly Sargon of blockhead racist cunts who just want to weaponize the suffering of victims for scoring political points. These people don't give a fuck about anyone who's actually getting abused unless they can cynically weaponize it for political clout.
There you go, it's just those racists. Why is it then that while there is a correlation between Muslims and grooming gangs, why is there a negative correlation for Hindus? This paper looked at newspaper headlines to identify the names of the perpetrators. I guess all those racists just love Hindu Indians, but they hate Pakistani Muslims for whatever reason. The study also looked at the proportion of the local population that was of Pakistani origin, and that's a powerful factor in explaining the levels of grooming gangs in that area. But the proportion of Sikhs, Buddhists, Jews, Christians, Indians and Bangladeshis had no effect. And again, being Hindu had a negative correlation. But why do the racist boogeymen love Indians and Bangladeshis? I don't know. Unless they're in on it too.
I just want to make sure we're all like in the same factual world. Do we all acknowledge the fact that of the total police data from the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, Asians and white people are about equally represented when it comes to, equally proportionally represented when it comes to child sexual abuse offenses?
So, well, hold on. Then let's dig into the data if you have it at hand.
Yeah.
So is this... So if we look at the data set that you provided, then what I'm seeing is that the child sex offense, whatever, correlates with the populations pretty closely. And if anything, the white population is higher.
The white population commits more of these crimes? That's why I'm sort of peeved it wasn't me there instead of Connor to debate this. Because when that document flashed up on Lonerbox's screen, I immediately recognized it. And you can't blame Connor for coming to that conclusion during a live debate where he's under pressure and he doesn't have time to read the whole document. And at a glance, it does seem to suggest that white people are disproportionately responsible for child sexual abuse. That is until you read the section that explains the disproportion. This is likely to be related to the overall under-identification of child sexual abuse in minority ethnic communities, and to the fact that white British descendants are more likely than any other ethnic group to be prosecuted for image offences, which account for 2/5 of abuse prosecutions. Either Lonerbox didn't read the report, or he just conveniently forgot to mention that part. Kind of strange to use data that includes image porn when we're talking about grooming gangs.
It's true that they were let down by cops and by counselors, okay? We know that one of the reasons was because of cops, mainly cops, claiming to be worried about racial insensitivity, okay? For some reason, in the year of the late 90s, early 2000s, or mid 2000s, the cops of South Yorkshire claimed to be worried about political correctness at a time when Little Britain was doing fucking blackface on primetime TV.
It's just those lying cops at it again. Except remember that source that you cited 2 minutes ago? One of the studies cited in that document specifically notes that a well-meaning desire to allow for cultural differences may result in professionals failing to take action when they should do so, fearing being seen as racist. Who cares that your own source proves you wrong? You can just cite Little Britain for some reason.
It's also the case that there was a complete lack of communication. The reverse problem of like the ethnic issue was a lack of communication between the police and the Pakistani community. The only people they spoke to were like imams, like religious leaders who were men who didn't really care.
Connor astutely points out a contradiction.
Out, but these feel relatively contradictory. So you're saying that the police were saying that they felt like they were shackled by cultural sensitivities along ethnic lines, and then you're actually pointing out the fact that they only talk to imams, they only talk to male patriarchs, they only talk to that if you talk to a woman without the man's permission within like a conservative Muslim enclave, that's going to be viewed as an insult to the man.
Again, going back to your own source. A female focus group participant said, "You'll be hated, you'll not be accepted, nobody would marry you, nobody would like you, your parents will disown you for speaking out in these patriarchal societies." More pointedly, in that study they say, in South Asian communities, because of patriarchal norms, especially concerning honour and shame, victims are either silenced or themselves blamed for the violence. They also cite the phenomenon which you just dismissed, that this approach of being culturally sensitive is often detrimental. Again, it's your own source proving you wrong.
No, that's not why that happened. It happened because
why
they just
not?
made the choice not to talk to them. Like the woman tried to reach out. In the United Kingdom, you can talk to a Muslim woman if you want. Yeah.
Your own source proves Connor correct, but your response is, nuh-uh.
It's not like we are a country that had Jimmy Savile.
Remember Jimmy Savile? Remember the 1950s, 60s? Because of that one guy, we have so much to learn from progressive countries like Pakistan, where 21% of children are married by 18, 3% by 15, and 1 in 10 births happens by 18. Where within the last decade, a bill was rejected to change the legal age of marriage from 16 to 18. A spokesperson told Al Jazeera, if the signs of puberty are visible, a boy can be married off at 12 and a girl at 9 years of age. If not, then, the legal age should be 15. But remember, Jimmy Savile, you're just as bad, Little Britain, yada yada. And they're not the worst culprits, ranking 6 in early child marriages. We can only assume Britain is number 1.
Yeah, so here's another issue I have. My understanding, maybe I'm wrong, most of these offenders are second generation, right?
Sure.
Okay. Like they're born here. They're our problem. They grow up in our education system, in our communities.
Well, I agree with you.
Connor. You should not have conceded this point. This is a really stupid and naive point from Lonerbox that should have been called out. As if culture is as simple as the country you were born in. I'm not going to explain a book's worth of information. I know actual Jake explained to us that leftists hate reading, but at one point they'll have to do the hard work. But to briefly reference Joseph Heinrich's The Weirdest People in the World, a lot of psychological effects are transmitted from one generation to the next, regardless of whether they grew up in their parents' home country or not. In fact, something like cousin marriage can resist assimilation. Second generation Pakistani Brits have higher rates of cousin marriage than their counterparts back home. So this notion that you're born in a certain country and immediately adopt all their values is idiotic. And that's the general attitude of the left. We say, we don't want more immigrants. They say, you have to take immigrants. Then those immigrants start causing problems and they say, well, it's your fault. They're British now. They implement the policies and we deal with the consequences. It's redolent of Vosh talking about a 5-year-old girl who was stabbed in Ireland by an Algerian immigrant.
But riots erupt in Dublin after kids are stabbed by what was he, Algerian? I don't know. Let's find out. Anyway, you've got the standard people being upsetty spaghetti about there being immigrants. The stabber lived in Ireland for 20 years. Police would not comment on the nationality of the detained man. If he's been in Ireland for 20 years, he's Irish.
Yeah, why are you upsetty spaghetti that an immigrant that you didn't want started stabbing children? He's Irish after all. And like many Irish people, he needed an Arabic interpreter. We famously don't speak English in Ireland.